perspective, volume, composition. Composition relates both to drawing part and painting part. There is such thing as, how to say that, like form memory? No, something like that. Visual library. It comes both to painting and to drawing. In terms of painting, we have the most important part is tone. So we have again composition that is connected to drawing. We have color. We have rendering or details. Types of surfaces, and so on. And yeah, and light is related both to tone and color, so we'll combine both these three, and this is lighting. We can like treat it as a different scene, but we can treat it as part of this three. So this means that we have to deal with all of that, and this is quite hard, frankly speaking. So what I suggest is that you can train these different scenes using more simplified exercises. Like you can come up with exercises or find out. I will give some examples of exercises which help you develop each of these parts. And again, the third, no, probably the most important thing is knowing what do you want to accomplish, because like being a layout artist is a bit different, for example, from being a background painter, and being a background painter for Japanese production is a bit different from Western and from all the stuff. For games and illustrations, again, it is a bit different in terms of style and rendering, so you've got to decide what you want first, or at least you can figure it out on the way. You'll probably change it as you go, but it's still way better if you have a specific goal in this regard as well, because depending on the goal, the importance of each of these parts will be different. For example, below the painting on the left, tone, we've got tone or values. So value structure is one of the most important things in the painting, probably after the composition. And there is idea or design, which is a whole different topic, because it sort of combines everything, you know. It relates to visual library, it relates to the purpose of the painting, and it relates to visual development and some other like huge topics. So if you're going for like anime layouts or anime backgrounds, then we have several major things we have to focus. First of all, it's understanding basic composition. So where do you place objects in place, and how to make a picture interesting. So is it centered, and what does it mean to have a centered object or a centered background? Is it like more skewed towards the right part of the frame, towards the left part of the frame? And each of these gives a different composition, and different compositions serve different purposes. So there are no right or wrong compositions per se, but there is a composition that serves the purpose or doesn't serve the purpose. For example, like very centered symmetrical composition can be very monumental, like grand and focus, or symbolic, depending on the production and depending on the painting. So you can do something very epic with it. But for more dynamic composition, you may consider like using curves and using angled lines and having the center of the composition be offset compared to the center of the frame. So this relates to this part. For the volume, it is again about understanding how the scenes can be visualized as 3D volumes. So it's essentially a combination of understanding perspective, understanding how perspective affects the objects, and how we can express different objects in space. So we can build any object from simple primitives and use it to convey volume. So why do you even need perspective and volume? We need that to make the picture resembling real life. So if you're striving for realistic scenes, yeah, this stream will be uploaded to YouTube when it's finished. Yeah, like all other streams. So we're striving to create an illusion of reality in our picture, and that's why we need to have perspective and volume in it. So, visual library. Visual library relates to the amount of objects, details, compositions, and all that stuff that you know. In reality, there is no such there is such thing as drawing from imagination, but it is essentially drawing from the scenes that you know and combining them. So it is essentially drawing from memory, and this means that if you don't know something, you probably won't be able to draw it, or at least to draw it well. So to draw tanks or draw anime backgrounds, you have to know like locations, different types of buildings, or use a lot of references, which is also building up your visual library over time in your head to understand which things look realistic, which type of details can they contain, and all this stuff. That's why you have to. That's why it's better to have a specific goal in mind, because if you have a specific goal in mind, you can build up visual library, a library of compositions, of colors, and all that stuff that is usually used for that purpose. Because, for example, color palette and the style, visual style of backgrounds for Western production, for game production, for anime productions are quite different, and they differ depending on the studio and the approach. So if you have a specific goal, you can build up a specific visual library that can match it, and that will make things a lot easier, and that's essentially what's going to give you the ability to draw something completely from imagination, because you have that visual library. For the tone or values, you have to understand how the value represents the surface. So what is value? It's just the difference between lighter tone and darker tone. So if we just put it like that, it doesn't create a surface. But then if I draw something like this, if I draw something like that, if I draw something like this, something like that, each value change creates a surface. So if we treat this well, we can create any surface just by adding value shifts. And if we add them correctly, and make a sense of some kind of source of light, it will create an illusion of volumetric object with a specific geometry that is located in space in some kind of perspective. And that's why learning values is very important, and usually it's more important than learning color, at least at first, because color can be changed quite easily, while value structure is way different. And for example, I can use any color and it will still be a cube, but if I change value structure, it won't look right in this kind of lighting situation, and so on. So values are a foundation, a very important foundation in painting. And contrast of values, especially because if you are painting and everything has the same values, but like different colors but the same values, it won't be very readable, so your audience won't get what you're trying to accomplish, and there won't be like the most important objects. There won't be a difference of importance in terms of objects. So you need to have value structure or any others like compositional structure to drive your audience attention to specific parts of the painting. We'll analyze that in a bit, but that essentially means that you have to keep in mind that there is a point of focus in your painting. You have to specifically choose it, and this point of should be kept when you're doing values, when you're doing drawing part, when you're doing composition. So there is like major focus of the composition, there are secondary sensors of attention in the composition, so you should keep that in mind. So yeah, we're essentially speedrunning basics. So let's talk a little bit about everything more in depth. So if you are going for just studying in background painting and you don't have a very strong foundation, so for example you haven't done anything in tone, in color, or you haven't tried to render anything before, first off, there's probably the first things that you should tackle, and it's probably perspective and composition. So if you have perspective and composition, good perspective and composition, you can start building your visual library and transition to tone. If you have a very good composition, the picture will still work even if it doesn't have like the best color choices or the best values, but it will still serve the purpose in some way. For perspective, it's better to try learning about like 1-point perspective, 2-point perspective, 3-point perspective, and to try drawing drills. So also it's quite a good idea to find out like what is perspective essentially, what is horizon, what is vanishing points, and how it does relate to perception. So our eye is essentially our spherical lens, and it is a two-dimensional, like the surface of it is two-dimensional. So you see a projection of three-dimensional space on your two-dimensional sphere of the eye. That's why you've got distortions, because it's impossible to project 3D surface on 2D surface, like so 180 degrees, 360 degrees, no matter what. So you'll have to project all the worlds that you see around you on your retina. And in reality, the only part that sees it quite well is like a small part of the eye that's constantly moving. So this creates a situation where you have an eye this is horizon, and horizon is the level of your head. So the horizon is always located on your eye level because it is connected to how you see the world. So everything above the horizon is everything above your eye level. Everything below the horizon is everything that is below your eye level. So everything here is above your eye level. Everything here is below your eye level. We have like vanishing points, and in the most extreme case, they're located here. And so we've got this kind of situation. And this is like a fisheye lens. Then again, if you zoom in very closely, like if you're close to the center, here we get a one-point perspective. So we have one vanishing point, and most of the vertical lines are straight, and horizontal lines are straight. If you go above the horizon, so if the horizon is quite low in the picture, you'll get like 2-point perspective or 3-point perspective. So you'll get vanishing point at the top, and if you move to the sides more or extend the frame, you'll get vanishing points on the sides and like up there. If you go lower than that, then you also have 3-point perspective, but with the vanishing point below the horizon. And vanishing point here and there. If you go like this and just extend the frame and keep the horizon line more or less in the center or closer to the center, you get 2-point perspective. So there's one vanishing point, second vanishing point. And if you extend your frame all the way to 180 degree of vision, so when you see everything in the frame, you'll get a fisheye perspective, which is essentially like raw image on the lens of an eye or of a very wide angle camera. So this is essentially a speed run of perspective. Very quick speed run. So learning about perspective and how it works will help you immensely with your backgrounds, because for example we have a frame, then I'm like, okay, I keep it closer to the center but still a bit like this, and then I may decide to do a quick perspective grids, and grids are very important. You don't have to rely on them fully, but perspective grids help you visualize the space you're drawing and to place everything correctly in space. Don't forget that every parallel line is converging on the horizon. if it's not like tilted. So if we have in this perspective an object that is slightly rotated like this, so it has a different angle, but it will still converge on the horizon. So we can draw this object in this perspective if we remember that it should converge on the horizon. So and so on. And that applies to every object that is not tilted like down or up. Otherwise, the horizon will, for this specific object, will go lower or higher. And then you can build up space based on that grid. Here, the most important thing, if you want to be like organic spaces, is your understanding of volume and visual library. Because if you know more or less how objects look, like how to visualize trees, how Christmas trees look, how rocks look, you can make it more convincing and more interesting in terms of detail. Again, don't forget that an object, so like a tree here, will be this big, but if we get it here, it will be that big. So when you're drawing this kind of objects, repeating objects, don't forget that they have vanishing points as well. So a bunch of trees, a forest, still has perspective. So if in general trees have more or less same height, here, like this level, then it should be a lot smaller here and there. So everything that you draw conveys space in one way or another. So for the next part, what is a good way to practice perspective? I'd say that for perspective, a good way to start is trying to learn about different types of perspective and drawing like simple objects in perspective, like drawing cubes with grids in perspective and trying to make them cubes, not like very strange deformed forms. So making cubes in 1-point perspective, making cubes in 2-point perspective, in 3-point perspective, and then trying to make cubes without perspective grid, but with a vanishing point. To make it more difficult, you can try like having a horizon line, having one vanishing point, and drawing one cube with vanishing point, and then trying to draw like a cube that is in the same perspective but is rotated compared to the first cube. Trying to get this right is very important because everything you can do can be simplified to basic primitives such as cubes, cones, spheres, something like that, pyramids. The second most important thing is to practice drawing ellipses and circles in perspective. So like in 1-point perspective, all horizontal circles will look like circles. All vertical circles will look like ellipses that align with their minor axis. So an ellipse has major axis, so it is the longest, and the minor axis. which is the shortest distance in the center. So we have a center line connects the sides with the center, and it is the longest part of the ellipse, and this is the shortest path here. So depending on the vanishing point, it will slightly move. So if you have a vanishing point below the horizon, like this, then our ellipses will align to that vanishing point. And so on. So if it's vanishing point at the top, it will be the opposite, and so on. I suggest like reading either some perspective books like Frame Perspective, Framed Ink, or Scott Robertson books, or watching some streams of Scott Robertson, or some other guys that have a very good grasp of perspective, because like explaining everything about perspective in a single video, in a single stream, will take quite a lot of time, and practicing it and having like all practice drills will take quite a lot of time too. I'd say that if you can master like very simple stuff in perspective, you can try moving to drawing more complex stuff and like visualizing it, trying to analyze it. For example, a very good way of building up visual library and really understanding how objects work is doing rotations. So, for example, you take an object and then you essentially draw it in different angles. You can take a photo, or better, for starters, a 3D model. So you find a 3D model, find how an object looks, for example, in one angle, and start with more simple objects. For example, how does a pen look? So, can you draw a pen in 1 point perspective? Can you draw a pen in 2 point perspective? And then drawing a pen in different types of perspective, trying to keep the proportions and everything else correct. So if you can draw a pen correctly, maybe you can draw a tree correctly in perspective and try drawing some types of trees. Like learning how good set artists or good layout artists simplify backgrounds and simplify objects is also a very good idea. So you can find settings or layouts, or you can find like pencil sketches from artists and try to analyze how do they simplify objects, what do they leave out, what do they draw, and which lines do they keep or emphasize. After that, for the volume, like it's kind of related both to this exercise and to perspective and understanding basic shapes and forms. Painting is a huge part, so, and composition too. For compositions, there are several approaches that work quite well for studying specifically. So one of them I picked from Matt Carr from Control Paint, and some other guys like Nathan Folks, Callan Chalk. So this approach is based on analyzing art, analyzing paintings. So what you can do, like you could take a painting and you analyze it in black and white and try to understand how does the composition work, how we can simplify it. So for example, we take something like this. I'll do it as a mask. fill it with something, and let's turn it black and white to make it more simple. So you see, there is a clear structure in this painting, and we have a contrast, and we have like this big large mass that is central in the composition. We have a very strong contrast here, which drives our attention to this part and this part. We have less contrast here in this zone, and if we simplify it to its utmost, we'll get something like this. 1, 2, 3. So this is the essence of the painting. This is the basic structure of it. Then we can do the same in values. So we can simplify the painting in 2 values, for example. And simplifying it is very important because dealing with everything with stone, painting, rendering, details, perspective, visual library, interesting shapes and forms, and everything like that is hard. And it never gets too easy. But we can make it more simple by tackling one thing at once. So what is the most important thing in the painting? What is the basic composition of the painting? How does it work? So we can simplify it to something like that. So we simplified it to 2 tones, to 2 values. And this is the most important part of the painting. And for example, we can go and do like 3 values and 4 values and keep the most important parts in mind. So what is the focus of the painting? What does it convey and which parts are the most important? Because details are just minor things after all. And having a strong composition is way more important. Again, for this one, how can we simplify this composition? So we have ships. So there is a sea. There is one ship. Goes like this. There is a second ship. How is it positioned in the frame? How big is that? How close did it get to the frame? What is it? What is the structure of the painting at its largest, at its most basic level? And try not adding too much detail at this point, because
So right now you are focusing on the composition of the scene?
yeah. So you are focusing on the most important part. So how does it look visually and which elements are the most important? So what drives the composition? For example, in this painting, we have the biggest mass, which is this ship, and then the second biggest mass, like besides the ocean, is the second ship. All these clouds like this composition works well even without these clouds. They just support this movement, this nice diagonal line. So this is a nice diagonal line, and all the clouds are just supporting it. And we are seeing that this is a nice diagonal composition. It is all based on diagonal lines, and they're driving our focus, our attention. So this is essentially why it looks dynamic, because all the scenes are positioned in such a way. And you can analyze like any painting like this, simplifying it to 2 or 3 values, and this will give you a general idea of the composition of the painting and what artists are like, yeah, and what does he see as important and what he simplifies and make it less prominent in the composition. So, and this is a very good example. Like, I did this very quickly, but you can take as much time as you want and get it as precisely as you want. You can do the same with like photographs, background art, good paintings you see on the web. So you can do this with anything. And this is generally a very good exercise. You can do the same with color, but so instead of doing it with like 2 values, you can do it with a limited number of colors, or conversely, you can just do it with simplifying like 1 or 2 color per object. So you do a very small painting, so you take this image and you like, okay, so I'll make a very small thumbnail of this painting, and I will try to get all the colors right. So you're trying to get all the colors right, but a very small format allows you to just focus on the colors. And the first thing you have to build for that, and you can focus at the same for values, is observing the color and trying to understand which color is that and which value is that. So not using color picker, just relying on your vision, and that way you can understand colors better, and you will learn how to identify colors, because color is relative. If you couple this with gray background, it will look completely different. So now it looks way more dark, whereas if I delete that, it will look a little bit lighter. And if I pair it up with a darker hue, it will look even lighter. And if I put a different color, it will look a little bit differently. So color is relative. That's why it's very important to learn how to see colors. You'll need this intuitive understanding. And so you can try to match the color without taking color picker and trying to get which hue is that. Focusing on larger masses and how they work in the composition. And they do the same for like every big element in the painting. So you're not trying to paint all the details and stuff. You're trying to get like a specific color and to understand how they work together. That way you're like accomplishing two goals. You're building up your visual understanding of the color and your intuitive understanding of the color. So you'll learn to see the colors in time. You'll be able to like look at the color and guess more or less which color is that. So is it that bright? Is it that dim? Or something like that. The second thing that you're accomplishing is you're building up your color library, and you're like slowly understanding color harmony intuitively. So if you analyze good paintings, if you draw a lot of studies, even small studies like this of good paintings, you'll be able to pick up artists' way of dealing with color and making it more or less harmonious, because you're working with it and trying to harmonize it in your small version of the painting. And keeping it small prevents you from going too much into details, and yeah, that way you'll practice it more quickly, focusing on the color, not the unnecessary details. For the color, it's also quite good to learn the basic foundations, like basic rules of color harmonies, different color schemes. So there are like triad, complementary color scheme. Like if we take two opposite colors and if they have a different value, they will work nicely with each other. So we can create interesting combinations of complementary colors and all the stuff. Makabuchi explains it way better than I do, and he has a whole series of videos on YouTube about how color works and how you can work with color, how grays are the most important part despite not having much color and saturation. They help unify the composition and make it more grounded. So learning that will help you a lot. So to make a small callback, so perspective, practicing basic primitives, learning about different types of perspective, then like doing value studies and black and white studies, doing small color studies, and learn about color. And this is a probably very good start for painting for beginners. If you're going to anime industry specifically, it would be a good idea to learn and study from anime backgrounds, so you can like pick different series that you like and pick backgrounds from this series, analyze it. So you can do all the same things that I mentioned. So we can do different layers of analysis. So first you can try to understand, so what is the perspective of the painting? So where are the vanishing points? So we can see that. Okay, so this is one parallel line and the second parallel line. We can find something else. So we have this thing and it is parallel, and this thing that should be parallel as well. So 1, 2, 3, and we found the vanishing point, more or less, and the horizon line. So now that we found the vanishing point and the horizon line, we can check it again. So we have roofs, and their vanishing points should also be on the horizon. So yeah, it converges on the horizon, though in a slightly different point, and so on. Then we can find if there is a second vanishing point, and where is it? It should be also on the horizon, so we see that there is a second vanishing point way far into the distance. So we've got a 2-point perspective where vanishing point is very close to the frame and the second vanishing point is quite far from the frame. Then again, you can see that everything in this painting follows that basic perspective structure. So the grass is converging to the vanishing point. The bushes, as they're serving as a fence, are also convergent to this point. The fence is also convergent on the horizon line to the vanishing point. and all and all and all and all. And even trees, they have perspective in it. So you can simplify the tree and all that stuff, and it will still have perspective. So all the trunks have perspective. Then again, this is the first part. Then we can analyze the value structure. So what does this painting tell us in terms of values? So we can grab it, make it black and white, analyze it in terms of values. So we have, yeah, we can paint right on this one. So we have like this part that's creating a nice big interesting shape, a second interesting shape. We have a character that's standing here, and it all creates a nice interesting composition. So composition in a sense is all about interesting value shapes and how are they distributed in the background. So we can, for example, simplify it like that, or we can go even more simple. So it goes like this. So you see, we already have very interesting composition and a very interesting background, even if it's just a few shapes. Again, we can go even deeper and we can try to analyze the color in this painting. So how we can analyze the color? We can do a small color study and try to harmonize. So what is the major colors that we can pick from this area? What is the major color in this area? Is it cooler or warmer in this area? It is in shadow and it's a sunny day, so the shadow is cooler than the green here. So the green here, as you can see, is way cooler than the green on the illuminated part of the bush. And the same here. So is it more saturated or is it less saturated? So, and so on. Then you can clearly see that we have a character doesn't have a lot of contrast in terms of values, so they are very close in value. You see, the value difference is small, but the character stands out because it has a different color and because it has a very nice red element that helps it stand out from the background. So yeah, another way is that we can make a working composition and add a focus element, a center of focus, and having a difference of color, having a difference of composition, like having a difference of value, having a difference of color, and using composition. Like this is like a rough example of the thirds. So a rule of thirds is essentially that if we draw like two lines and divide the picture in three more or less equal parts, roughly, then we have this kind of framing, and if you put an object here or here or here or here or around these areas, it will create a more dynamic, nice composition. It is just rules that that can help you build composition more like easily and not thinking about it too much. But again, this rule can easily be broken and you can make a working composition even without it. You can put it way here, you can put it here, it will just work a bit differently and it serves different purpose. Yeah, but yeah, you can find out where's the object of the object of focus is located in the picture compared to the center of the picture and the center here. So is the horizon on the center line or is it below the center of the frame? So here we have a nice difference. So we have a low horizon line and everything is not equal, and it also helps you create a nice interesting composition. And it also means that the camera is looking up at the character because the character is higher than the camera position. So you're looking up at the character from below. Then you can go even deeper than this and analyze what are the shapes here. So which shapes does an artist use for the trees? So how does branches look? How does trees look? What kinds of trees does he paint? How does bushes look? So they're not like one form, one solid form. They're broken up into different parts, like one volume, the second volume, like the parts at the bottom, third volume, how the light follows the volume. And yeah, if you go beyond that, you can focus on how the artist paints details, or rather how it simplifies it. So like all this grass is like one color, and all this stuff is like two or three color, but it is layered in a more intricate way, and it has nice variation in shapes. So you see there are different types of grass here, different hues of grass, so it's not everything repeating. It has one type of grass, the second type of grass, the third type of grass, the fourth type of grass, and so on. So all the different plants that you can come up with and that you can build in your visual library or use from references. Like there is not one type of tree here, so there's one type of tree, the second type of tree here, the third type of tree way into the background, the fourth type of trees. And every tree is not the same, so it has a little bit different like structure, it has a little bit different size, the branches are different, and you want to keep that variety and that difference to make it more appealing to the audience and to make your paintings more interesting. So, and this is like a very good way to approach it, to analyze it, to try and replicate it, and to try, for example, and use just one component of it. So for example, you take this picture as a reference, but you only use color from it. So you don't take any other things from this painting, you use a completely different perspective, you can use a completely different composition, but you just use the color of this painting. And this will serve as good reference, and you try to use this color and arrange a new painting with a new composition, but using this color palette. Or for example, you can take only the perspective, which means the position of the horizon line and vanishing points, but place different objects and create a completely different scene based on that picture using only the perspective of it. Or you can like only take the trees or specific greenery of it, understand how it works, and create a completely different scene just using this picture as a reference for like trees and scenery. So I guess like you can make a park scene with benches and stuff, and you use a little bit of different tree, but you use that tree as a reference for the shapes, for the forms, and so on. So this will help you learn more quickly and focus on one specific scene at a time. So I guess this kind of settles it for very quick introduction to painting and drawing backgrounds. A good idea would be to like wait a minute or two while I'm finding my Kazoo's art book, and we'll get it from there. Olga Kazuo. Okay. Like one, and comparatively how it works in color. Yeah, Kazuoka has a very good foundation, so he can draw very well and quite quickly, and he has a very huge visual library because he has been painting for over 30 years. So he's a master painter and draftsman, like drawer as well, draftsmanship too. So you can find and analyze his stuff. But again, you can analyze as a masters or as anime backgrounds as well. So for example, you can take this drawing. You can find the horizon line again. So what is below the horizon line? So you can find again the first vanishing point, the second vanishing point. So this is first vanishing point. You find the second one. It will be on the same horizon. Yeah, that's more or less right. Yeah, more or less right. So we found out the basic perspective of it. Should also converge on the horizon. This is our horizon up there. Up there. Then this road should also converge on the horizon. Yeah, more or less seems so. So, what is the perspective of it? Then, what is the composition of it? So, what is the central object? Which part of the painting our eye sees as the most important of the drawing in this case? Then we can like look at the details, how the buildings are drawn, how the windows are drawn, how does he simplify the trees and bushes. And we can do the same here and look at, so everything works in values even without color. That's why I say that values are probably the most important part, and composition as well, because you can add and change colors later on and it will still work. It will still work if I like take this painting and desaturate it. Or if I change the colors, it will still work because the structure is there. You can see the most contrast in this part and in this part between the building and the cloud. Everything makes sense. So we have a source of light. We can find out where is light coming from. So light is coming from the top left part of the painting. We can understand that because we have shadows. And because the value follows the shadows, follows the structure of our light source, illuminating the scene. So, yeah, I don't know how deep we should delve into details without confusing most of you. So I guess I'll take 2 or 3 minutes break and wait for your questions or more specific parts of the process that you want to learn about. Otherwise, we'll talk a little bit about values. Okay. Am I going to make background animation today? No, I'm not going to make background animation, at least today. I'll make background animation, not sure about this week. So, yeah, not like right here, right on the stream, right now. Any other questions? Yeah, we are pretty close to the end. I don't want to drag today's stream for too long. Okay, no questions, it seems. Okay, so values. Values are a hard thing, but it's an important thing. So, the point is that if you have, for example, you have some kind of environment, yeah, basic structure of tones is like you can watch some Marco Bucci and control paint videos and you have to do a lot of studies. So if you have an object has a base color. So for example, we have a cube and its base color or base tone is something like this. So it's 50% gray. And if there's no light sources, well, it will be completely dark, so there is no point. But essentially, this is an intrinsic tone of this cube. So, like, the material has this kind of tone. But if we have any source of light, then this tone will change compared to the natural tone. So, in the light, this object will have something around its real value. In shadow, it will be darker. So, for example, we have a cube. We have a source of light illuminating it, and for example, this is so the source of light is located in this direction at this angle, so it is way up there, hitting it with this angle. Let's suppose it is sun, and so all rays are parallel. So we can construct a shadow from this. 1, 2, 0 the third. 1, 2, 3. This will be our shadow, and this is, as we can see, in shadow. This is half in light. This is still in light. This is clearly in shadow. So there is like Scott-Robertson rule, but essentially this general rule is like the value of the object in shadow depends on the brightness of the bounce in light. So if there is no bounce in light, so if this table is black, everything is black, the room is black, and everything preserves, like, doesn't reflect light back and doesn't let light bounce, everything in shadow will be black. In real life though, there are surfaces that reflect light, there are secondary sources of light, so it will be darker but not black. And how much darker it is comparatively to, like, the illuminated side depends on the brightness of the secondary light sources and on the bouncing light. So this area is illuminated, so the light will bounce from this surface in the shadow to the shadow part. So this area is illuminated, so the light will bounce from this surface and it will illuminate this part a little bit more than this. Again, this part will be also a little bit illuminated because the light reflects off the surface. As we go a little bit higher, like here, it won't be as much bouncing light because the light has to travel more distance to reach this point. Like this area is almost 90 degrees, so it is rotated towards the light source, so it reflects and gets the most amount of light, so it will be the brightest. This area, it also gets the bouncing light from the floor, so it will be also a little bit brighter. And like that, from understanding all the ways the light works, you can paint any object that you can simplify it into simple primitives. into basic shapes and forms. This is a context shadow, and here as well. How can you use color impact frames? Um, like usually they use color inversion, but essentially like you can use any contrasting colors. Like impact frames you work because you have a very significant contrast, so you can use anything as long as it's contrasting. Like it is quick enough that it doesn't matter much which kind of color do you use, unless you have a very specific goal in mind. So because color can convey emotion, and if you have a very specific like goal in mind, a very specific mood in mind, then you can use that and design based on that. But aside from that, you can use any color for colored impact frames, as long as it's contrasting compared to previous frame and compared to your normal color of the shot before that. Yeah, aside from that, like in terms of painting and stuff, learn about atmospheric perspective and different types of shadows, like context shadows, uh, occlusion is also a very good idea. Like when the two objects meet the surface, like when the two objects meet, they create a space that is very hard for the light to get in. So like this is a very thin space, so not a lot of light gets there and bounces back into your eyes. That's why it's quite dark, and it's usually in shadow. Like it is always shadow, and like it is the same principle everywhere. So like, touching fingers will create a darker tone between them, and so on. There's like a very simple but important way of dealing with light is like using a soft brush. It helps you create nice curvature and nice spherical or more curved surfaces very easily. So I can create something like this, and for example decide that the light source is located here. So this is a sphere, this is a second sphere, so as a sphere it will have a darker tone here, then the secondary source of light would create a lighter tone here. Can do it like that, connect to shadows. So this is going up, going away from the surface, and we can create the surface like this. Add a highlight, and we've created a surface very easily. Yeah, it is like very well known in concept art, uh, but they don't really use it in anime much. At least I haven't seen it used very often, because they have like a different set of techniques, and mostly it's like either very stylized or painterly backgrounds, and not like rendered detailed video game or illustration style. Okay, so this is a very rough and quick intro to backgrounds. I bet someone like Makabuchi or Nathan Fox did it much better. So I'd suggest checking their channels and learning it, taking it slowly. Uh, Everything comes down to how much you want to learn it and how much time are you willing to spend on it. Uh, Background painting is very fun. If you really get into it, it allows you to create like endless amount of environments and let them interact with your characters. Uh, and overall, it's very fun thing to do. I just gotta push your way through some fundamentals, and then you're free to go and create anything you want. Essentially, we'll always be learning about it. There's like no such thing as completely knowing fundamentals. Even masters are still learning, so it's okay to you to be learning as well. Like there is nothing wrong with that. Not being perfect and all that stuff. Your colors and your values and all that stuff will get better as you go. That's for sure. So yeah, if you have any questions, I can answer them. If you don't, yeah, we can wrap up. Okay. So as there are no questions and there is not much activity in the chat, then we are wrapping up. Thanks everyone for being here. It's been a pretty chaotic stream, but I hope that helps someone at least.